Lindsey Straus is a 73-year-old trans woman who's also the biological father of 3 sons, triplets who are now in their early 40s. As you'll hear in this interview, the story of Lindsey's transition from husband, devoted dad, and Little League coach to trans woman, social activist, and lay minister at her church in Brewster, Massachusetts is truly inspiring and courageous. But that transitional journey did not come easily or without pain. After more than 20 years of heterosexual marriage, Lindsey decided to transition and become a woman at the age of 50 in 2001. Years of separation and estrangement from her family then followed. Lindsey moved out of the house while remaining the family's sole breadwinner, but she was excluded from significant family events like vacations and graduations. All that said, as she tells PFLAG Cape Cod's Rick Koonce in this interview, eventually, reconciliation with her family did take place, even with Lindsey's ex-wife, with whom she now talks almost every day. As for her 3 sons, surprisingly, a common love of the Boston Red Sox by both Lindsey and her grown sons helped heal family wounds and bring her and her boys back into each other's lives. Lindsey even remembers the exact day, October 18th, 2004. It was the day after Game 4 of the American League Championship Series, when the Red Sox scored a major comeback against the New York Yankees. Lindsey Straus, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's so good to have you here today.
It's great to be with you, Rick.
You have quite a backstory. You are a 73-year-old trans woman. You are the biological father of 3 sons, triplets. You're also a lawyer, a lay minister, a social activist, and apparently a big Red Sox fan.
I am. In addition, I am a choral singer. Music is an important part of my life.
And I know you're very involved in your church choir, among other things. Before we get to any of that, I want to ask you this. As we record this interview today, it's been just 4 days since the U.S. Supreme Court gave the legal go-ahead for the Trump administration to begin expelling transgender military personnel from the U.S. military. Some of those individuals who have served for years are decorated war heroes, and at least one of them is an experienced, accomplished fighter pilot. What's your reaction to this?
Very, very distressing, very disturbing. It's clearly been motivated by anti-trans animus. The lower courts found that there was absolutely no basis really other than animus, and that it was blatantly unconstitutional. And for the right-wing majority of the Supreme Court to give the go-ahead to removing trans servicemen and women and non-binary people from the military, as you said, many with years of experience, is it's going to cause havoc. It's going to be expensive. It's going to reduce our national security, and it's just beyond the pale as far as I can say.
And we should point out that in addition to being trans, you're also a lawyer and a litigator, as I understand. So how did we get here? Why has America, or at least a certain portion of America, become so anti-trans? Where does that come from in your view?
Well, I think it goes to the fact that people don't understand who trans people are. And it makes us an incredibly easy target to make us the other. We're the classic example of the other for people. And it's a little like we're lepers. Nobody wants to touch us. And so we make an easy target, and it allows the right wing to have a target that distracts people from the much more important issues of the day, the economy and our security and things like that. And it's always been that way. And I don't, there was a period of time, I think, during the Obama and Biden administration where I think we made significant progress, and that's being reversed now. And I like to think that the arc of the universe bends towards justice, and that we will come out of this on the other side at some point. But it's incredibly distressing to be a member of community that's been targeted like this.
Do you live in fear for yourself?
Not really, and maybe I'm naive about that. I live in a little bit of a bubble here in Cape Cod and in a church community that's incredibly supportive of LGBTQ plus people. So I don't live in daily fear. Even doing this interview may be subjecting me to a certain amount of increased risk, but I'm willing to take that because I can't live my life in fear, and I won't live my life in fear.
Let's pivot now, if we can, Lindsey, and talk a little bit about your backstory, your personal backstory. I know that you wrote in the Boston Globe in 2016 that as a child, you'd been aware of your female self from an early age. Talk about that. What was that like, and what feelings and experiences did you have?
Well, I'm probably not like the typical, if there is such a thing, transgender person who thought that I was in the wrong body from a very early age. I think that to some extent that's as a result of the fact that trans people and the trans experience was not something in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up that people were really aware of. I became aware, I had an experience when I was about 8 or 9, thereabouts, when I was playing dress up with some girls my age, and I had an opportunity to put on some pantyhose, and it kind of awakened me and awakened that female and that feminine self. The other thing that I remember from childhood was I always wanted to be hanging around with the girls. You couldn't get away with this in today's day and age, but I actually remember when I was in elementary school during recess chasing the girls around the playground and kissing them, and I don't think a boy could get away with that now, but that was another sign. And when I was in dancing school, I was always looking at the girls across the dancing school floor saying, oh, I love their dresses, and I really wanted to be one of them. So it was something that I experienced from that point forward, and then it grew from there.
And so this sense of femaleness was about identifying with girls.
Yes.
Okay. It was not about sexual attraction to them, or was it?
No, I don't think there was a sexual component of it at that age at all. Boxes mean nothing to me, but I consider myself to be bi, but I'm more attracted to women, biological women, I guess, than men.
Now, you transitioned in 2001, am I correct?
Late 2001, early 2002. I mean, I actually came out and left my job at the law firm that I was working for in Worcester, Massachusetts, in May of 2002. But I left my family and moved into a small apartment in Worcester in December of 2001.
And you had been married at that point for how long?
For about 25 years.
And how did that coming out announcement process work with you and your family? Can you describe that for us?
Well, it was a difficult transition, pardon the expression. My kids didn't really understand it. My ex knew that I was transgender from almost the moment we got married. I came out to her as being trans, although it wasn't really called that in those days, about a year after we got married. So she was aware of my desire to be female, and she would periodically ask me whether I wanted to live my life as a woman, and I would always say invariably no, but I knew I was lying.
Now, in November 2002, it's my understanding your sons saw you for the first time dressed as a woman. What was the context for that setting?
That was at my dad's memorial. He died after a long illness and battle with cancer in early November of 2002. And I gave a eulogy along with my brother shortly thereafter. And I believe that was the first time they saw me as Lindsey. And
I know that you positioned this transition with your wife a little bit indirectly, as I recall. I think you were in a restaurant and it was announced that some big changes were coming. Is that right?
That's my recollection. It's a little, maybe I'm sublimating it. Maybe it's a little something that I don't want to think about. But yes, I mean, I don't think I handled the transition as well as I could have. And it was very distressing for all the family. And we had a final Christmas, and then I moved out. And it took a couple of years for them to come to grips with it, but we eventually did find our way back to each other.
And how did that happen?
Well, the Red Sox had a lot to do with that.
Thank God for the Sox.
Because in 2004, my sons were in college. in 2004 when they beat the Yankees in that famous game with Dave Roberts stealing second base. They contacted me and we started to talk to each other about the Red Sox and their run to their first World Championships in 89 years or whatever it was. And sort of at that point, we started to come back together. I always knew what we would. I always had the belief that the love that we had for each other would conquer all, and it did.
And you have 3 sons. They're age 42?
They're age 42, going on 43.
And grandchildren of yours?
I have one granddaughter, and she is just the love of my life.
And how often do you see them? And is the relationship kind of equal among the 3 in terms of...
Absolutely. I see my granddaughter as often as I can, at least once a month, and I talk to my ex-wife daily, and I talk to my kids probably on average every week, and I'm in various chat texts with 2 of my sons who are Red Sox and Celtics fan, and we or converse as we're watching the Celtics unfortunately lose the last 2 games, and we're Red Sox fans and Patriots fans, and I get up to see my son in northern Vermont occasionally, but I see the other 2 on a fairly regular basis.
And we'll say that, again, you have 3. We're not going to mention their names just because of the environment in which we live right now. But Lindsey, I know that when you wrote your article about your experience in the Boston Globe in 2016, you talked about what joy you had had being a father.
Yes.
Talk about that experience and how you were involved, how you were present, and how the transition doesn't in any way erase any of that.
Well, it certainly doesn't, Rick, because they required an incredible amount of work and effort, as you can imagine. We were within a pound of the world's record for total birth weight of the 3 of them. They all came home from the hospital healthy, and my then wife and I did our level-headed best to give them the best upbringing that we could. We lived in Concord, Massachusetts, and they went to really good schools. I coached their Little League. I coached soccer. I was their Sunday school teacher in a UCC, United Church of Christ church, from kindergarten till 7th grade. So we were involved in all aspects of their lives. And I was kind of on the daddy track at the law firm that I was at, because I would come home. I made a point of being home for dinner or to make dinner and to go to almost all of their baseball games. And I put my family first.
Yeah. Work-life balance. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What are the biggest misconceptions people have about trans people?
I think the biggest misconception is that somehow we're sick, or that, it used to be that the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, characterized us as having illnesses. But I've never thought that I was ill. I believe myself to be a psychologically and emotionally balanced and intact person. And I've never thought that being trans made me it didn't change my personality. I've always been an outgoing, gregarious person. I love to laugh. And none of that changed when I transitioned. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things that I would recommend to trans people who are listening to this is that if they're thinking of coming out, they should be proud of who they are. They should not be afraid to express themselves, to be their true selves. And that goes a long way to have a successful transition.
I know you to be all of the things you've just described. I also know that you're a very strong person. So for a person who might be wondering about their gender identity, their sexual orientation, what advice would you give them about how to explore that, both within themselves and in terms of looking for external resources?
Well, there are lots of ways now that probably were not available to me 20 years ago, but the principal thing that helped me was I found a really qualified gender therapist in the Boston area who had enormous experience with trans people like me. And she was an integral part of the journey that I made and helped me come to grips with and realize and then make the transition. And so you need to have, if you can, have supportive family members. Both my parents were extremely supportive. My therapist said that they were the most supportive parents that she'd ever had experienced with a client. So, and some people aren't that lucky. They will be kicked out of their houses. They'll be kicked out of their family. So that you have to find support where you can. And there are lots of support groups. And, I found incredible support in my church. So if somebody is in a church like the Unitarian Universalist Church that both you and I are members in, that I would encourage them to utilize that as a resource. PFLAG is another resource. There's lots of material on the web now that wasn't available, when I was transitioning. So there's lots of ways to get the support that they need.
Did your sons have therapy as well at some point along the way?
They did a little bit at the very beginning. They went with my ex to talk to a therapist about what this meant. And I don't think that they continued in that very long. They're all strong men, proud men. And, I've always found in my experience that men are a little less likely to reach out and be involved with therapists. They think they can do it on their own. They're stoic. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's a reality.
I know to transition, you gave up a lot. You gave up your marriage, your life as a man, your home, and for a time, your relationship with your sons. I know you today to be a joyous, boisterous, outgoing person. So it was clearly worth it. And I'm wondering, for people who maybe have not come to terms with themselves being transgender, what would you encourage them to think about? Because the idea of totally upending their lives might be potentially traumatic.
Well, it requires, I've always been told this, and I guess I've come to accept the fact that it does require courage and inner strength. And I guess I had both, and it stood me in good stead when I did transition. So, but you have to, you have to have faith in yourself, and you have to envision a life for yourself as your true self that will make it worthwhile. And it was for me. I mean, I like to analogize it to Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade when he's faced with a chasm, and he has to take a leap into that chasm and hope to be held up. And I took that leap, and I was held up. So you have to find support wherever you can, but there's support, and inner strength that I think if you're confident in who you are and you want to be your true self, you can do it.
I think a lot of cisgender people have a tough time getting their heads around the concepts of gender dysphoria and physical dysphoria. Lindsey, can you talk a little bit about, and maybe there's a way to colloquialize this understanding, but what's it like to be in a body that doesn't feel like your body?
Well, I mean, I managed, and my experience may be different than other trans people. I was able to compartmentalize my trans feelings in a way that allowed me to continue to function and enjoy life to the fullest extent, because I figured I was only here for a certain period of time. So I wasn't going to let this interfere with my ability to have an enjoyable life. But I know that that's not the case with a lot of people. So it just worked out for me where I was able to eventually get the body that I wanted to have. I maybe too much information, but I've never had any surgeries of any kind. I've been on hormones that allowed me to have, some changes in my body over the last 20 years. But there was a time when trans people, if they didn't have the ultimate surgery, this what was called sex reassignment surgery and is now called gender confirmation surgery, that they somehow weren't quote unquote true trans people. And I think that's poppycock. I think everybody is different and they have different needs. And for me, it worked out that growing my hair and taking hormones so that I developed a female body.
And this is your hair.
This is my hair. Okay. And I've been very lucky in that respect.
And it's long. Okay.
Yeah. and some people, again, I was in a relationship with a trans person and she did not have the benefit or the luxury of having long, luxurious hair like I do and had to wear wigs, so that I had something going for me. I don't have a prominent Adam's apple, that many trans women would need to have surgically, shaved down or have facial feminization surgery. The face that I had reasonably well as a trans woman. So every person's situation is different, and the amount of changes that they need in changing their body and having surgeries is up to them. But there are, obviously a lot of more trans surgeons and now than there were. And, if that's the way they need to go, then they should do that. And, a woman in our church, a trans woman in our church, was able to get insurance to cover, got a ruling, at least here in Massachusetts, that allowed her to get some surgeries covered by insurance. And, I fear, unfortunately, the one fear I do have personally is having my hormones taken away. I'm on Medicare, and I have a Medicare Advantage program that covers my hormones, and I do have a fear that the Trump administration is going to do whatever it can to eliminate that coverage.
Yeah. So this is an inside baseball question, but in terms of those hormones, if you're transitioning from male to female, does it generate hair growth? Does hair come back? Can you reverse a receding hairline?
No, it doesn't do anything. I mean, what hormones do for a male to female is they actually reduce hair growth. So I really don't have much body hair at all anymore. Going the other way, for a female to male, the male hormones that trans men take allows them to grow beards and that kind of stuff. So it works out pretty well for both.
So can we talk for a minute or two about dating as a trans person? I know you had a relationship after you and your wife separated. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the challenges of that and what your experiences have been.
Well, I met a trans woman who was not yet out here on the Cape here at a time when I was not living on the Cape. And we started a relationship online that eventually blossomed into a relationship offline. So I really never dated. I have never really dated. I had that relationship, and unfortunately, tragically, she died on my mom's birthday in 2003, about a year and a half into our relationship, at which point, having been introduced to First Parish, I moved to the Cape. So since that time, I really haven't dated. I'm happy as a single person. If love falls into my lap, great. But if not, I'm very comfortable in the life that I have right now. I'm alone, but not lonely.
So just a few more questions and really interesting conversation here. Let's talk about your church involvement. You and I belong to the same church.
Yes.
You're a lay minister there. You're one of the worship associates, so you preach periodically. You sing in the choir. What has that faith community been for you? How important?
It's been my rock. And I was just unbelievably fortunate that the weekend that I transitioned, a Memorial Day weekend of 2002, my then partner, my trans partner who had subsequently died, introduced me to First Parish. And the moment that I came to that church, I felt at home spiritually and among kindred spirits in terms of, because we believe one of our primary doctrines, if we have doctrines, is belief in the inherent dignity and worth of all people. And I felt that just exuding from every pore of every person that I came in contact with that first weekend and subsequent to that time. And it's a very trans-friendly, LGBTQ-friendly church with members who were plaintiffs in the same-sex marriage case, Linda and Gloria Bailey Davies. And it's been the sort of center of my life, other than my family life, ever since 2002. And, I don't know what I would do without it.
I would say that, among other things, you're also a social activist. So what is your advice to anyone in the LGBTQ community today about how to take on an activist role, and what might be the range of things that people could do to kind of agitate for equality?
My personal experience, I felt preaching from the pulpit at various UU churches, and I also went to a couple of colleges in the early years of my transition to give speeches, it's really about education. I would encourage trans people who are comfortable in their own skin and have the courage to reach out to educate people. That education is really one of the principal ways I think that we can get people to understand who we are. And one of the things I've done, I think my social activism now largely consists of just being myself and living my life in a confident and open fashion that I think allows people to say, hey, that person is trans, but she's not shying away from being her true self and being out there. So I think that's my principal recommendation. recommendation. There's obviously, opportunities for trans people in states that aren't as liberal as Massachusetts to try to appear in front of committees of the legislature to lobby for laws that protect trans people. We had a referendum in Massachusetts that I worked on that 70% to 30%, voted to preserve the protections that are afforded under state law for transgender people in housing and other forms of public accommodations. So there are opportunities, and, I encourage trans people who are comfortable enough to do that, going to PFLAG, appearing in front of PFLAG meetings, participating in that, and going to schools. I talk to youth at our church at a human sexuality course. So there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, Lindsey, such a rich backstory, as I said at the outset. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that has come up as we've spoken that you'd like to share as we kind of wrap up today?
Well, the only thing I think is to be confident in yourself and to recognize that being your true self is worth it. And no matter the obstacles that are put in your path, if you have confidence in yourself that you're making the right decision, nothing can stand in your way, and it's all worth it.
Well, Lindsey Straus, thank you so much for your time today. You are indeed a profile in LGBTQ plus courage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.